1962, the invasion of Normandy and the terrible events of the Second World War were still a part of vivid living memory. But somehow, movie audiences were ready for the epic docudrama The Longest Day. Based on the book by Cornelius Ryan and packed with stars like John Wayne, Robert Mitchum, and Eddie Albert, this film became the biggest black and white film of all time. Following the stories of individuals at every level of the chain of command, this film roams everywhere from Omaha Beach to St. Mary-Glees, giving an epic scale to the story of D-Day. The RAF saw fit to drop tankards of Newcastle Brown Ale to the troops, so we thought we'd hunker down in our foxholes with a few bottles and revisit this 60-year-old war movie. It's time for episode 58 of Toasting the Classics, The Longest Day. Welcome to Toasting the Classics. It's the podcast where we take something people call a classic, drink something related to classic, and then decide whether it's still a classic. What are we passing judgment on this week, Clint?
The 1962 film called The Longest Day.
Yes, 62 is what I have written down. So,
yep, The Longest Day. Released in 1962. It was a big old blockbuster, black and white drama about the D-Day landings. Really interesting movie. I mean, I've seen it many, many times. You know, I made this choice when it was closer to June 6th than it is now.
Yeah.
You know, and I'd seen this many, many times. I think it's a wonderful movie. I've always really enjoyed it. Just some basic facts. It stars pretty much everybody in the world at the time.
Sure does.
1962. So you got like John Wayne, Sean Connery, you got Peter Lawford, you've got, you know, you name it, they're in it.
This is one of the few times where an ensemble cast, whenever I think of that, I always think the movie's not going to be good. Like usually a movie's kind of thrown together and crappy, but this one, it's effective. Like there's just a whole bunch of really great actors in it, and a whole bunch of famous people. There's one that kind of sticks out and seems kind of thrown into the movie, and that's part of my biggest surprise. So I'm not going to talk about it just yet, but there is one really huge actors in this that I was like, what was that guy doing there? What was that guy doing in the movie?
Right. Yeah, there were a few like that. We did Patton, so it was hard to see Omar Bradley without a big schnoz.
Who was Omar Bradley in this one? I saw him in the cast of characters at the end, but I was like,
it was the scene where they're standing on the battleship, and he's got like a leather kind of field jacket on, and he's got his glasses, and they're telling him about the landings, and it's like one really simple part. I think they just show Bradley kind of once in the entire movie. But yeah, so it's got this huge cast of characters. Something else that's really cool about this movie is they had four different directors. They had English, French, British, and German. So they had a director for each of the kind of subplots or parts that were going on. If you think of Normandy, the Normandy invasion is this big kind of like all these gears moving. One gear would be the Americans, and they're getting, you know, Utah and Omaha, and then you've got the British, and they're doing Sword and Juno, but and then both sides have paratroopers, and then you've got the French paratroopers plus the Free French, and then you've got the Germans, and these are all like gears moving, right? It was a brilliant idea. Zanuck, I think, is the name of the main director. He said, okay, we're going to have a director for each of these gears. So there's a director just for the German sequences, a director just for the French, and so they could shoot it all simultaneously. They didn't have to worry about trying to do it sequentially or something. They shot it sequentially, and then I think each of the directors, I know the German director was a German, and so they knew the story, they knew the German actors, they used German actors. And that was the other thing, is like each of the sides spoke their language. So the French spoke French and they had subtitles. The British spoke British English. They should have had subtitles sometimes, but they didn't. And then the Germans spoke German and had subtitles. So it was really cool. It was a really neat way to do it. I think this is the only time anybody's ever really kind of done that. They normally have them speak English kind of throughout.
I like it when they use the natural languages for people. They didn't even translate everything. In my version, like the subtitles didn't always translate what was going on in the other language.
Right.
This one, it was just a few throwaway lines that wouldn't be translated.
All the German dialogue was especially, I mean, that was a really, I think, extensive dialogue that was not in English. It was all the German stuff. And the only pain in the butt that really was that you couldn't really walk away. It's not like you go do the dishes and listen to it. Because you have to sit there and read the subtitles. And what are they saying? unless you speak German, which I don't. So
no.
Anyway,
for me, my German is at the level where if there's subtitles, I can follow it and I can look at it and I can be like, oh, they did or did not translate what the guy said. Like I can match up. I'm like, no, that's not what that guy said. Like I couldn't write down the translation of what he did say, but I know it wasn't that. I remember in a Die Hard, I don't know, one of the Die Hard movies, the Germans are saying something and they translated it. I'm like, they rewrote that at some point because that is totally not what that guy said. And it like changed the whole plan of what the Germans were planning on doing. You said you've seen this a bunch of times. I know for you, a lot of people have like a comfort show. And I know you said Band of Brothers is like your comfort show. You've watched it like a million times, right?
Right.
So how often do you watch this one? Is it like that? Is it like something you watch?
I don't own it. If it comes on, back in the days when we watched TV, it wasn't streaming.
Right.
Like when it was on, when we'd have AMC or Turner Classic Movie or something like that, it would come on and I would watch it. I mean, if it was on when I was flipping through, I'd turn it on and watch it.
There used to be a thing where you'd turn on the TV and there'd be a movie on and you'd be like, oh, this is a movie I really like. It's 2/3 of the way through. I'll just watch this. Nowadays, if you're watching a movie, you can't just blame it on it was on TV. Like you went out of your...
You search. By the way, I found this on streaming for free on YouTube. Is where it streams for free.
Okay. I watched it. I just rented it for $3.99 on Prime. Actually, they gave me a discount for something. I think it was like $1.50.
I just tried to find it. Just searched Longest Day Free. I said, surely it'll be out there somewhere. And YouTube had it. And there's another fantastic movie. So the guy that wrote this, his name was Ryan, wrote the book.
Cornelius Ryan. I was trying to remember while I was watching this because this movie is very similar to A Bridge Too Far.
Yes, he wrote that too.
He wrote that book. I read that book. I know I read that one. I don't know if I ever read The Longest Day. I read John Keegan did a six armies at Normandy or something like that book, and I read that. And I've read a couple of Normandy accounts, but I don't know if I've ever actually read The Longest Day. But I did read A Bridge Too Far. It was, it was like the same. Not John Keegan. That's not who's the guy that wrote Band of Brothers? Stephen Ambrose.
Ambrose.
Stephen Ambrose is the one I'm thinking of. John Keegan's a completely different.
A Bridge Too Far is about Operation Market Garden. And it's also another big ensemble cast of characters where they have the Germans, they have the English, they have the Americans, and you have Sean Connery in that one. You have Robert Redford, you have Robert Duvall, you have Elliot Gould. Yeah, Elliot Gould.
Elliot Gould being in it. I don't remember who else is, but it's a ton of
who played Gene Hackman's in it. He plays the Polish general that gets a short shrift. Plays a great Polish general, by the way. The guy that plays Sonny Corleone. I can't remember that actor's name in The Godfather. Yeah, Khan. Yeah, he's in it. So it's just this huge again, and they play these like little 5-minute vignettes. So there's no real leading man. Sean Connery probably arguably is kind of like the John Wayne version. He's kind of in it. He's the most prominent perhaps throughout it.
I think John Wayne, it's either John Wayne and probably Robert Mitchum. I think are the two big ones in this. I think they're the closest to, I think Robert Mitchum is probably the one that carries through the whole film. Because John Wayne, he's in it a lot. I don't know. It's hard to decide which one is the main actor. Maybe it's Eddie Albert. I don't know, but he's prominent. Right. I was watching so many times. I was watching this, and I was like, now who is that guy? Like Eddie Albert. I was watching it. And I was like, who the heck is that guy? I know that guy from something. It took me a while to be like, oh, it's Green Acres.
Yeah.
That used to be on in syndication when I was a kid, so I was kind of vaguely familiar with that show.
Yeah, they all make an appearance. I think in 1962, like not all of these actors kind of carried through. Like that guy, for example, Green Acres guy. In 1962, you would have recognized him and been like, oh yeah, I know who that is. Right. Now it's like,
Oh, you mean like today? Today, some of these people have. It took me a second. Roddy McDowell's in it.
Roddy McDowell.
I was like, I recognized his face, and I was like, okay, I can tell from the way they're filming him and the way he's talking that he's supposed to be somebody making a cameo. And I recognized the heck out of his face, but I was like, what is he from? And who is he?
Yeah. Well, again, he was just the 60s. But you had Richard Burton.
Yeah. Richard Burton is probably somebody that I don't think is on the radar. He's not on the radar for a lot of people.
Not anymore, but he was one of the biggest actors in the world, married to Elizabeth Taylor, I think, right?
Yeah, that's I think what I know. When I think Richard Burton, I think of him and Elizabeth Taylor being a big thing.
I don't even really so much know. I know he did he did a bunch of Shakespeare. That's kind of what I think of him as being famous for.
Yeah, he was a classically trained
right.
actor, you know. The other story, Richard Todd. Did you know who that was?
No,
so
I can't think of that.
Richard Todd plays the major who's told to take the bridge. Stay until relieved, or hold until relieved, or whatever. So that's Richard Todd. He's a huge actor, but again, we don't have any idea who he is. And he was a huge actor in the 60s, I think up through the 70s, and then just kind of fell off the radar.
Yeah, I don't recognize him. I'm looking at him. I looked him up and I'm looking at his picture. I don't recognize him from anything.
He's a good looking dude. Well, he was in a bunch of big movies, but they're all movies from the 60s that, you know.
Hold until relieved.
Hold until relieved. Yeah, that guy's got a big complex going on. If he's hearing voices like that.
That's an odd choice in the middle of a war.
It'd be fun to follow him around and, like, you know, my mother said once, and then have this voice of his mom come out of nowhere and said, "Eat your broccoli, broccoli," or something.
Or it's him standing in front of the urinal and hold until relieved.
Yeah, right. Hold until relieved. A couple of cool pieces of trivia. Kurt Jürgens is in this movie.
Now, is that who I think it is? Is that the German that I think it is? Because one German shows up in a very small role, and I was like, wait a minute, I know that chubby guy from something.
Yeah, he's riding the bike. Okay.
Yeah.
So he's riding the bike, and then Karl Stromberg is one of the generals. He played.
There's more than one Bond villain in this movie, right?
Those are the two.
Goldfinger shows up like really early on. He's very distinctive. And I was thinking, when isn't Goldfinger like the same year?
Gert Frobe is a Sergeant Coffee Can. Coffee Can. Yeah. And he plays Goldfinger. Kurt Jürgens plays General Gunther Blementritt. He was the guy that he played Karl Stromberg in The Spy Who Loved Me. So two Bond villains, and then Sean Connery, of course, storming the beach.
Yeah, definitely. Although they don't really have to storm much of the beach, the British. It's a little bit easier coming on.
Yeah, they kind of walk onto the beach. You're right. Yeah.
They're like, the Yankees are pinned up. They're not doing their job, you know.
Right.
You know, it's nice sunny weather and they're moseying ashore, but whatever.
I was impressed by, you know, after reading it, I was always impressed by the movie itself, but I was particularly impressed after reading the history how, you know, historically accurate it is. San Mariglis as the point of attack for the 82nd, and why they had to go there because of the German cannons, you know, that they needed to take out there. And
right.
I mean, just all the tactical stuff was very historically accurate, and I thought that was kind of.
I don't dumb it down for you or anything like that. Yeah. It's definitely like plenty to follow there, which is always. It seems strange to me that it could have been so popular. I think there used to be a market for like guys' war movies. Like they used to put out a movie and it was just like, you just count on a bunch of nerdy guys. You know, a bunch of guys are going to go and want to watch these military movies. I don't remember I haven't seen a movie like that. Like, I don't know, when did they do that? Hunt for Red October, things like that, maybe.
Top Gun,
back, but those
perhaps Top Gun Maverick, maybe.
Top Gun, yeah. See, I haven't seen that, so I don't know what that's like. Now, a whole bunch of people went to see it, and it's kind of surprising to me. Like, when I heard about that, I was like, I'm not interested in that at all. Like, what happening to Maverick 40 years later is not interesting.
I will say it's fun. It's completely inaccurate, complete bogus. Never talk about it with somebody in the Air Force because they'll be like, oh, whatever, you know, this could never happen. But it's a fun movie. I mean, it's reminiscent of like the Iron Eagle, you know, all the dogfight movies from the 80s, but with current technology. And it was all like, it's not really, none of it's CGI. It's actual real fighters in the sky and everything else. And it is pretty impressive. It's just a fun movie. I think that's why people enjoy it so much, because it takes no brains to watch it. You can sit there comatose, you know, drinking your slush, eating your popcorn, and not have to think, you know. And then you're not being bombarded by any political messages one way or the other. Really, it's not like, you know, Reagan was the best, but it's also not like my two moms. Now, what's funny is that, you know, a lot of criticism about this movie was that it's too much of a documentary, which I found interesting. Is I guess critics at the time expected, because now like Black Hawk Down, you know, it's a gripping story, but it Ridley Scott, yeah. So he even said it's the closest thing that he's ever, you know, made to a documentary, right? And it followed. And if you think about it, it's kind of the same thing. it follows the stories of each of these guys. Like the generals were real, the majors were real, all those people were real. What happened to him, he follows it and he sort of documents it. So it's a reenactment rather than a documentary. I think that one, it didn't win Best Picture, but I think it came close. I think it might have been nominated and stuff like that. But I don't think that in that time, like in 1962, I think they wanted like big epics, right? Like big, bold kind of stories. Like I think Lawrence of Arabia was probably of that age.
Lawrence of Arabia was like almost the same time, maybe like 1961, something like that.
Right.
Cleopatra was
Cleopatra.
While this was going on. John Wayne was in that Genghis Khan movie. Terrible, where he's wearing.
That's a great movie. Oh my gosh.
That's
cultural appropriation. What?
Yeah.
I'm gonna get my eyebrows trimmed.
It's just cultural appropriation. It's like that one's.
Well, I'm Genghis Khan, mister. Duh. That was pretty good, huh?
Yeah, that's not bad. That was sort of a vestige. When I was a kid, people were still doing John Wayne impressions. And I honestly, to me, this is about the only movie I've ever seen with John Wayne in it. I don't think I've ever watched John Wayne movies.
Interesting.
I don't know. I'm sure that's not true. My dad was a big fan. I'm sure I must have seen one or two of his Westerns. Oh, well, True Grit. I saw True Grit. But I don't, all the big bulk of, I think he's in all these John Ford movies, and I just never saw any of those. Like, that just wasn't something that was on my radar.
The thing about most of them was if you'd seen one, you really had seen most of the rest of them, especially with the John Ford stuff,
That's the thing. You don't go back and watch stuff like that,
No, you really don't. My, my in-laws, they're in their 80s. They do still watch TV. Like they have cable and there's a particular channel. I think it's called INSP, and it shows nothing but Western. So it's like Gunsmoke. During the day, it's like Gunsmoke, The Rifleman, on. And then, on the weekends, it's like John Wayne all weekend long. Right. And, I had never really, until just the past few years when they started watching this channel, I'd never really, watched it. They watch it because they reminisce. I mean, my father-in-law especially really likes to watch it, and because it's when he was a kid. He was 30s or 40s probably, or 20s maybe when those came out. So it fond memories of the time for him.
Yeah,
so.
My stepdad used to, I don't know if it's the same channel, but he used to watch some on cable that was like, Lone Ranger, Gunsmoke, a whole bunch of stuff like that.
Hey, are you, I know you've got a medical emergency going on right now, but are you having a drink?
Yeah, I can. I'm going to open up a drink. I'll survive. Right. I'm assuming I'm kind of through the worst of it. Hey, you know what I just realized? I've been carrying around a bottle opener on my keychain for years, and it is a Newcastle bottle opener.
Oh, really?
I didn't even realize. Yeah, I've had it on there for like 15 years.
Right. So that is what we're drinking. Is Newcastle. I guess
I gave it away. Yeah. Why did you go with Newcastle? This was your choice.
Well, I mean, I think the only drinking scene we have is Richard Burton in
that's right.
RAF pilot having a brown ale, and it's an English brown ale.
Presumably a warm brown ale, right?
A warm hand drawn brown ale.
Yeah.
So it'd have very few bubbles, and it would be probably about 60 degrees, something like that.
There is some mention of champagne, and there is some mention of cognac. And I was afraid you were going to go with cognac again because we did that for Patton. And
well, Patton
champagne comes up all the time in these film things, but
Patton was much more. It was much more pronounced. I mean, there was actually a scene around particular cognacs that you got.
No, it was the same thing. This one was the same thing. The German had the really nice bottle of cognac, the Napoleon.
Oh, right, yeah.
He was like, he's about to basically lose the war. He's like, well, we just lost the war. Go get that nice cognac and open up. It's the occasion.
I had thought of that, but I didn't have $1,500 to drop on a bottle of cognac.
Yeah. So, you're a slacker. You're a slacker.
Well, the other reason is, and this is a true story. D-Day invasion happened June 6, 1944. Yep. On I believe it was June 7th, the RAF filled drop tanks for Spitfires with Newcastle beer and flew them across the channel to serve the lads a beer after the D-Day invasion. So, true story. I always thought that was really cool that they actually took drop tanks filled them with beer and flew them across the channel for their troops. I thought that was really cool. It was Newcastle in particular, so I always thought that was kind of neat. So a little odd to Newcastle.
That is a perfect reason to have Newcastle for the show. I love that. That's a great backstory. Speaking of flying things over the channel during D-Day, before I forget about this, my grandfather was actually was in the army at the time of the Normandy invasion, but he was not in one of the first divisions at the beach, but he was back in England with his division, and he was a photographer. So somebody was like, hey, we're just flying planes back and forth to make it look like there's more planes supporting the invasion. So do you want to ride along? And so he was like, yeah. He was like, yeah, can I bring my camera? And they were like, sure. So he flew over the invasion zone taking pictures like during the battle. And I was like,
oh my goodness.
On one hand, that's amazing to be around history. And I guarantee I would have made the same stupid decision, but that's so dangerous to fly over. I guarantee the Germans are shooting at everything. Like they're definitely not, absolutely. If you're close enough to take a picture, you're within range of who knows what. But
well, that was definitely a different time, man. I remember I have a friend who's here in town, here in Las Cruces, and he's a pilot, and he had a 1948 Cessna 140. It was 140 or 142, but it was a 1948 model, and he invited me up to go flying in this little thing. I was like, sure, and it's what they call a tail dragger. So it's one of those that has the landing gear in the back as well, which is what all of those planes were at the time.
You said a tail farmer?
Tail dragger. So it has, So and it's a special license to be able to fly those because it's really kind of hard to take off and land with those. But that's how all those airplanes were back then. They all had that rear landing gear. Anyway, so we go up in it, and this thing is it's like flying in a matchbox. I mean, it's super thin, it's super loud. All of the instruments are analog in this thing. Everything's run by cables, and pulleys and stuff like that. And so I was a little bit apprehensive doing this, but I kept telling myself that we won the war with this technology. So by God, if it was good enough to win the war, then I think it'll get me up and back down again. And it did.
Crashes were really common in World
War II.
They
were. Yeah, they were.
Yeah, it was really dangerous. It was not like today when you fly across the ocean and you assume you're going to get to England alive.
Right. Well, he since sold that airplane, bought a much newer one. That one it's kind of like driving. Like I have a 1976 Chevy pickup that I've gotten since you left, since you left. Oh, okay. And I drove that thing back down from Carlsbad, New Mexico here, so it's about 3 hours, and I was so tired when I got here. I was so beat up from just trying to keep it straight. Oh, it wants to go all over the place. Plus the suspension just beats you up. I mean, I was just worn out. And I think it's like that for this plane that he was flying. He would fly it. We would fly around for an hour or something, get down, and his arms are just so tired from holding the wheel where it's, everything where it's supposed to be. And there's so many things you have to pay attention to. And the new one is so much more, smoother and easier. It's like driving a much newer car that has cruise control. It just doesn't hurt as much. So
cruise control, automatic transmission, power brakes, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, everything. Suspension that actually works. It keeps you on the road.
Exactly. So
did you watch war movies when you were a kid?
Oh yes. My dad was a big war movie guy. So I watched.
Did you have a favorite one?
That's a really good question. I actually did enjoy this one as a kid. I remember this movie. This probably would have been one of my favorite black and white movies, because even though I watched plenty of black and white movies, I had a little bit of an aversion to sitting through them to some extent. It was hard.
Sure. Yeah.
But this was one of my favorite war movies that I watched. And it was actually, I think at the time, might have been the biggest black and white movie, box office wise, ever, when this movie came out. Uh-huh. That's not true today, oddly enough, even though this is 1962, because a movie like Schindler's List, right, because it was released in 1993, made 10 times as much money as this. Right. I don't know. I couldn't find. I was actually looking for a list of adjusted for inflation dollars for black and white movies. This one would pretty sure be one of the top movies of all time, because it was all like The Artist, The Last Picture Show. It was all things released later as a novelty act, black and white. But
Raging Bull, things like
Raging
that.
Bull. Yeah, exactly.
Well, this actually, I did read that bit, and so this one was the largest grossing black and white movie ever made until Schindler's List.
Okay. Oh, until Schindler's List.
Yeah. So Schindler's List is the only thing that beat this thing out, and that was 1999 maybe, or 7 or 8 or
93, I think.
93. Okay. So so it held up for a long time, And something else that's interesting to think about, and I've thought about this often about a lot of those war movies, because a lot of them came out in the 50s. We were only, when this one came out, we were, 18 years removed? 17 years removed from the end of World War II. So this would have been, 18 years from the date of the Normandy invasion, this thing came out. Right. So that's not too long ago.
Like something can happen in 2004. It'd be like a movie about Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It'd be about, like I could sit here and tell you what it was like to be in Hurricane Katrina, and there could be children watching a movie about it in the theater, I always think about that. Because one of the things they always do in these movies that were made within the memory of the thing is the Germans are never portrayed. Like Schindler's List is a good example. The difference between the way the Germans are portrayed in Indiana Jones and Schindler's List. Now, of course, that's one director doing it, and he may have his reasons for doing this. But the Germans are portrayed as like evil monsters in those movies, and in these, they're just the enemy. They're just the other team in the war, And I was thinking about that. Obviously, Steven Spielberg is Jewish and has a whole different perspective on World War II, and just probably has trouble seeing them as being human beings, and that's all fine and good. I get that, but the people that lived through the war, I don't know whether they at the time saw the Germans as being more benign, as just being like the enemy, or whether it's because they were our allies in the Cold War that we started portraying them, like you do The Longest Day. How bad can you make the Germans? Because if you get in a war with the Russians, you're relying on the Germans to fight the war for you.
Sure.
So you can't make them that evil. So I always wonder what's going on there.
You mentioned Ambrose. So in Ambrose's book, about Easy Company, which is what Band of Brothers is based off of. He says in there that the American troops identified more with the Germans than with any of their allies. Like the British were cocky and stuck up. The French thought they knew everything. The French were the French, in other words. But the Germans were just like a normal working people, blue collar type of people. And they got along really well with the Germans. Now, the German peasants, or not peasants, but the citizenry, right? The farmers and just the people doing their thing.
Not the Prussian aristocrats in charge of,
And
I remember. I don't know if it was Stephen Ambrose or not, but one of those authors, I always remember this one quote he had, which was, American soldiers would contact German soldiers, and like universally the response would be like, "This is terrible. Why are we fighting this war? These are regular people just like me and you. Like I don't want to kill these people." And they would meet the Japanese, and it was like the more contact they had with the Japanese, the more they
hated them. Yeah, the more they hated them.
Because of the way the Japanese, I think. Some people just say that's racism, but if that were the case, they probably would have felt like that before they met them, and then meeting them would have changed it for positive. I think it actually had to do with the way the Japanese were conducting the war. I think the Japanese were fighting in ways that were just completely like antithetical to the way Westerners fight war. They were killing prisoners. They were like using insurgent style tactics, setting off bombs and things like that, shooting from behind, So
the people forget that the Japanese themselves, the Imperial Japanese Army, was very racist itself. They considered themselves superior to every other race, and they considered us subhuman. So as bad as we made them look, they made Koreans and Chinese and Caucasians look as bad as well, and had no qualms about killing any of them because they considered them, inferior. I mean, anyway, I mean, we can go on and on. The rape of Nanking and all the rest of that, kind of speaks to their.
Are you saying that there's a lot to say about the Second World War?
I'm saying it's more complicated than. I'm saying it's more. Yeah, critical race theory kind of falls apart when you get something as big and complicated as that.
Critical race theory would certainly have interesting things to say about the Second World War, especially.
I think it would be
not just in the Pacific.
I think it would be a little bit. I think it's too simplistic, but in any case, I think it's a really good point, though. And I think I don't know. Did they draw a distinction? And it could be fair or unfair. Today, as we speak, which is I don't know when this is being released, but June 28th, 2022, they just sentenced a 101-year-old German ex-concentration camp guard to like life in prison, which will probably be like a year and a half, right? If that, right? But we didn't just pick up like a normal infantryman and charge, and send him to prison for life. So we always drew a distinction between regular army and the SS, right? The SS like knew what was going on. They knew what they were doing. And oftentimes, and you could argue what all you want about it, but
it depends on what they were, some SS divisions were just like, politically, you had to have political connections. So you were a Nazi, but in terms of, if you were in the SS Panzer division, that you didn't really have anything to do with concentration camps and stuff like that.
Right. I mean, and that's fine. All I'm saying is that we do draw a distinction between SS and regular army,
Yeah, for good reason.
Yeah.
There's the average Wehrmacht not necessarily particularly interested in the politics of the war at all.
Right.
Just what the hell are you going to do?
And Schindler's List was all about the Gestapo, right, and the SS, and as was Inglourious Basterds, same thing. When you have all these depictions of real scumbags, it's always going to be the Gestapo and SS. Although you're right, Indiana Jones, all of them are lumped into one big criminal enterprise.
Well, I think we talked about this when we did Raiders. I mean, Indiana Jones, like 1936, right? Raiders of the Lost Ark, and they already have like units of the German army that didn't exist at that time.
Right.
So
but it's convenient. It's convenient. Yeah, it makes for the story, right?
Yes.
Absolutely. So do you remember? So I grew up in the 70s. I had like the late 70s, and then early parts of the 80s. We still had like reruns, black and white reruns of shows that were on maybe in the 50s and 60s, right? And there were like World War II based series. I think one was called Combat.
I don't know that one. I know Hogan's Heroes. That was on.
Yeah, that's a situation comedy in a prisoner of war camp. That's kind of funny. So you had like Combat. There was one called The Desert Rats or something like that, which is based in the African campaign, which is kind of unique in that nothing ever really gets talked about when it comes to Africa. I think I could have sworn there might a couple more, but
there were a bunch of fighter pilot shows. I think for a while.
Yeah.
A series about fighter pilots in World War II and stuff like
there's
that.
There's one called there's Pappy Bowlington's group, the Black Sheep Squadron is what they called it, which is based on this guy named Pappy Bowlington, who was a fighter ace in the Marine Corps, flew in the Pacific Theater. And the guy was just basically a drunk. And so what better guy to make a TV show about than a drunk? Then things changed. So World War II was a rah-rah theme. And then the Korean War happened, and that messed up everything. Other than MASH, I can't think of any Korean War based old movies.
There are quite a few Korean War movies from the time period, but they're tend to be B movies. There's things like The Steel Helmet and stuff like that. There's movies about like
The Steel what? I'm sorry, you broke up.
The Steel Helmet.
Oh, okay.
Which was a movie about the Korean War. That's one of the most famous ones. That's actually got a little Korean kid named Short Round, which is where Indiana Jones gets the name of his.
How interesting.
Yeah, later on. But there are movies about the Korean War, but they were basically during the war, and they were like rah-rah propaganda pieces,
how interesting. Yeah, I had no idea.
There's actually one of the biggest war movies of all time just came out last year, and it's a Chinese version of the Battle of Chosin Reservoir with the Americans
as the bad guy, yeah.
It's this huge propaganda piece that everybody loves in China. It's
of course, $1
billion, but it's garbage.
Yeah, right.
Garbage, but So it's definitely prominent. But in terms of being on the right side, I feel like we were pretty clearly on the right side in Korea, but it just didn't go as well, I guess, is why people don't talk.
Yeah, so, that was the first kind of stalemate or test of our mettle, I guess. And then what's interesting is you had a lot of movies come out about Vietnam, and it was accepted that the movies were always downers. There was never a raw movie about Vietnam. Well, let me take that back.
There were things like
the movies that lasted, that have a legacy,
right,
are not the raw films. So like Apocalypse Now, Platoon, Full Metal Jacket, things like that. A Hamburger Hill.
That's one thing I was going to say about. I was thinking about this when you were talking about the historical accuracy of how the Normandy, or especially Omaha Beach, is portrayed here. And I was thinking, like, these movies themselves create the historical memory for the thing, right? They create. It's a huge part of people's perception of what happened in the past. Right. So when you were saying it's very historically accurate, I was like, I don't even know how to get past my images of Saving Private Ryan and this movie to try and assess what I've been to Omaha Beach, and it does look right. So I can say that at least, but it's such a big part of how I picture the conflict that I have trouble.
Sure.
The Big Red One. The Big Red One has a really extensive Omaha Beach sequence also.
And that's another great movie too. Yeah,
that one's pretty good. I like that one a lot. But I was thinking,
let me just clarify. When I said historically accurate, I meant tactically. Like, this happened, and this happened, and this is where it happened. They were like, So like within each of those, he creates a narrative based on one or two central characters, right? That's where we landed. This is when we landed, and then we flew. We dropped in here, and we went into that village, and we got shot up. And so all of that all the tactical stuff was accurate. That's what I was talking about.
Yeah. There's a scene in Saving Private Ryan where they're all talking about, and I think the point of the scene is to show that the average American soldier understood, and there's a big difference between World War II and other campaigns, is that the average American soldier understood what objectives they were trying to take and why, and what they were doing there. They were like, we're here, we got to take St. Lo because St. Lo relieves the pressure on St. Mariglis, and this town links up to this, and then we get Cherbourg, and that's a big port, and we're trying to beat the Germans because the Germans are bad. Whereas in Vietnam, everybody was just kind of walking around, and it was unclear what the heck they were ever supposed to try to accomplish.
What are we doing here? Yeah.
Go ahead.
Although we had, I think we could argue that recently, maybe as because the movies that were made that have lasted, like I said, Deer Hunter, Platoon, all these, they were written by people who were adamantly against the war. Coppola was against the war. What's his name that did Platoon was in the war. Charlie Sheen. Oliver Stone, right? Charlie Sheen, actually. I mean, that's his kind of biography. And so these people were fervently against the war, and it was shown at a time when the majority, the opinion was against the war, right? And so, but like We Were Soldiers came out 15 years ago, maybe longer than that. The Mel Gibson movie. It was a while back, but it was a popular movie, and it was a bit of a rah-rah. Now it what it tried to do is it tried to separate that one battle from the rest of it, and it tried to put it in context at the end, like, oh great, now they're going to think they're going to win, and they're going to come back, But it was arguably much more positive, pro-America soldier type of stuff. All I'm saying is that as the memory fades of how terrible it was, maybe people get to write a new narrative, and it could be a bit more rah-rah or something. I'm not saying they should or anything. I'm just wondering if that's what happens.
I was thinking that definitely the historical memory of the Vietnam War has become the Oliver Stone narrative of the Vietnam War. That's how, if you talk to my daughter, she's 20. She's never spent a lot of time with anybody that fought in the Vietnam War, certainly didn't live through it. When she talks about it, she sounds like one of these people from the 60s, all of the Oliver Stone types. The whole war was a debacle. We were just there to murder a bunch of people and stuff like that. And it's just like a very one-sided portrayal of a very big, complicated event.
Right.
And I think that narrative has won out. I don't think that I mean, because honestly, where do we get our memories of something that's so long ago now? We get it through academia because it's a long time ago. We're not really.
That's really true.
If you are dealing with living memory, you can still talk to many, many people who experienced the Vietnam War firsthand. Myself, I grew up talking to quite a few people who experienced the war as Vietnamese people. So they have a completely different take on what America was doing in Vietnam than hippies from a university did. They were like, thank you for coming to Vietnam. Thank you for fighting the war. Like, otherwise my family would have been killed immediately. Like
right.
A very, very different take on the North Vietnamese invading South Vietnam. But so that's neither here nor there, but that's getting into a whole different war. So again, the Vietnam War is probably something we could talk about quite a bit.
Yeah, well, we could. I was just kind of riffing on war movies and the whole genre, and the genre, changes depending on the war, I guess, is sort of what I'm saying. I mean, I don't know how many movies have been made about World War II. I'm sure you could look it up and see, but some of them are just absolutely ridiculous, and some are slapstick comedies, and some, but all of them, have us as the hero,
Absolutely. And, things. Inglorious Bastards.
That's a recent one. Actually, was that
it's a remake? It's a remake. Yeah, but I don't know anything. I never actually saw the remake, so I can't judge whether it's the same kind of film. But that's a whole different type of thing. And then there's lighter things like Monuments Men or something like that. Something very serious.
Right.
I mean, this is an event. This event is too big for anybody to try to see it through one lens and try to say, oh, this is what happened. Here's the biggest event that ever happened in human history. And it's just gonna have one narrative. I would hope nobody's dumb enough to think that, that's just, did I ever tell you the story about my mom had a German lady who was a little bit older than my mom. So this lady would have, she's like maybe born in like 1930, something like that. Mm-hmm. She was at my mom's gallery, and she brought in a portrait she did of her father, right, to the gallery. Wanted to hang it on the wall at the gallery, but she painted him in his uniform. He was in the SS. He's got his hat on. He's got the death's head and everything on and everything. My mom was like, "Are you insane?" And she was like, "No, we were very proud of him. We didn't know anything about the Holocaust or anything like that. We were just very proud that he was in the military." My mom was like, "You're nuts. Like, you got to take that home. Like, what do you think?"
So funny.
I don't even want that in here, much less hanging on the wall. Like, I don't want to see it. Like, it was very strange.
There's a skit. I can't remember. I heard it on another podcast I won't mention, but there's a skit on YouTube, some improv troupe in England or something, and they put on a skit, and it's "Are We the Baddies?" And have you seen that?
Yeah, it's the guy from Peep Show. I can never remember his name, but I can probably picture.
He's
Are
like,
we the baddies?
Are we the baddies? He's like, "What do you mean?" "Well, we have a skull in our hat." He's like, "What is that? What does that mean? Who has a skull? What else could that mean?"
There was a take on it. There was a take on it about the Mandalorian, because when they arrest Baby Yoda and they put him in like little tiny baby handcuffs, and somebody's like, didn't one of the stormtroopers look at that and they go, "We have handcuffs for babies?
Are we the baddies?" Right. It's such a great premise. I love it.
What did you think of the guy? What did you think of the guy who plays Eisenhower?
That was an interesting story. He is a dead ringer. I mean, he looks just like him. He really looks
a lot like him.
Yeah, he looks just like him. I think he was thinner he looked thinner than Eisenhower did. I think Eisenhower's a little bit beefier, but I mean, other than that, looks exactly like him.
Exactly like him. I have a book, Crusade in Europe, and there's like a drawing of Eisenhower on the cover, and it looks just like that actor, like exactly.
Yeah, it's amazing. They dubbed his voice though, apparently. So I don't know what he sounds like.
He didn't sound anything like Eisenhower, and he wasn't a very good actor. So they dubbed in his voice. So that must have been very difficult. He's kind of like wooden when he's delivering the dialogue.
Yeah, he doesn't really do a lot of acting. He's like, "What do you think?" And then as they talk to him, he just kind of nods his head. So
exactly.
Yeah, that was.
Well, in 1962, Eisenhower would have been such a prominent figure that if you tried to have anybody play Eisenhower that didn't look like Eisenhower, everybody would have been like, "What is good?" They actually almost got Eisenhower.
Yeah, I almost got him, but he was too old. And
too old. Yeah.
That was the other thing about John Wayne. So John Wayne, when he played that role of the guy that he plays, the colonel, the airborne, 82nd Airborne colonel, he is 20 years older than what that guy was at Normandy, right? So I'm like, because that colonel was probably in his like late 30s. He wasn't, in his 50s, and
I was like, I'm not surprised you broke your ankle jumping out of a plane. You're like,
you have osteoporosis. Yeah, you have osteoporosis, old man. Drink some Ensure and go home. Yeah, yeah. So that was kind of funny. What did you think about the German pilot? That's a big part of the movie.
That guy's funny. That guy's great. Yeah, I like that guy.
It was awesome. Yeah, he's can't remember his name, but the subplot is
just he's so animated, and he's just like, I can't think of any of the lines in German. I'm seeing the subtitles, but just like,
all he did was insult his superiors. And there's that line, like, why do you keep him around? Why don't you court martial him or something? He's like, he shot down 56 fighters over Russia. He's like the best ace we have. And so he's relegated to Normandy with 2 planes and his entire squadron. He's like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? So I thought at
least those guys didn't die.
That's true. No, that's true.
See, that was kind of the thing. That's very much a part of what I'm talking about the Germans being the bad guys. It's that guy's like strafing the beach and killing Allied soldiers.
Yes,
but you're like,
I know.
You're watching it. You're like, that's his job. He's supposed to try and do that. What are you going to do? Like, the guy's hilarious. You're not even really rooting against him. Like, it's weird. Weird position to be in. But
I contrasted that. So there was a couple of parts. So it's an interesting thing that you bring up. So there is a part when they're storming like one of the pillboxes, right? And they're just getting cut down by the MG40 machine gun and trying to hit it with grenades and everything else. And you contrast that with Saving Private Ryan, where they open up with a flamethrower on them, right? And they just hit it with a flamethrower. And then what does the guy say? Like, don't shoot them, let them burn, as they're running out on fire. Like, so there is a little bit more animosity. I think that was probably closer to the truth, during a battle.
Well, there was the one part. There was the one part in this where the guys come out of the pillbox and the one kid is like shooting. He's like,
he's like,
I wonder what bitter means.
Bitter. I wonder what bitter means. Yeah, bitter. Yeah. That's that was kind of sad. Well, they did the same thing in Saving Private Ryan. The guy comes out with his hands up, and the guy and he says something, and the guy shoots him anyway. And he's like, "What'd he say? What'd he say?" So they were trying to surrender, and they shot him anyway. That's a good point. That is.
Oh, it's also in Die Hard. The guy comes out. The guy comes out and he says something. And John McClane shoots him, and he's like, "I'm sorry, I didn't catch that." And then the other German comes out, like, he said, "Don't shoot." Like, attacks him. The big mean one. Yeah. Actually, I think that actor was in some. Anyway, I've been watching so many movies. I had COVID, so I watched like 8 movies over the last couple of days. So everything's blurring together a little bit. But that actor was in something I saw recently.
Which the really big guy?
No, the other guy, the guy that he shoots, the one that's like Nick Sheeson, and he's like, wow, But anyways, I was really impressed, and I don't know how they did this, but when the French are attacking the town, Wistreham, there's this long hand shot, aerial shot somehow of the guys like running down the street. The Germans like a running gun battle down the street, and it goes on like steady cam like for like a long time. I'm like, oh, they just used a drone to get that shot. But then I was like, well, what? What did they film? How did they film that?
Right.
How did they do that? Like, I guess they had helicopters.
Or they had like one of those like big crane things that just kind of
maybe
on tracks. Maybe
it looked like it would have had to be in the water. It looked like it would have had to have been in the water to get that shot. I couldn't figure it out. It was a really cool shot. It was like
I know which one you're talking about. Yeah.
When you're a kid, you look at one of those books and they show you like the whole battle mapped out on the and you can see the battle, and it's kind of fun to figure out how the battle went. It was like that, but a shot of it. It was very cool. But anyway, I don't know how they got that.
Yeah, no, you're talking about the one at the French, right?
Yeah. The one with the Free French when they're going over.
Didn't they do the same thing with the bridge though? Didn't they have a shot like that with the bridge where they kind of came over it? You see them like fight, like they're running down the bridge and shooting, and you just kind of see them. I think they had that shot. I seem to remember a shot like Well, those are the two that I remember, like the Free French one, and then the bridge, the British with the bridge.
The strafing shot of the beach is pretty. I mean,
strafing one, yeah, but that would have been an airplane. Yeah, that would have been an airplane for sure. Yeah. But oh man, it was I think. Well, anyway, I picked it, so I guess now it's about time for our
biggest
surprises.
Okay, well, so for me, it's a minor thing. You were talking about they brought in Germans and French and stuff to do the dialogue. They actually brought in Eric Marie Remarque, the guy that wrote All Quiet on the Western Front, to do the German dialogue, to make sure the German dialogue.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I was impressed by that. I was like, that's a pretty good get. Like, that's a serious literary figure coming in to do, the German. That was just a little minor. Yeah.
Yeah.
But what I thought was really impressive, because I hinted at this before, but Richard Burton shows up and you're like, what's this guy doing in the movie? He seems like he's like overacting like crazy, really taking a lot of the air out of the room just by being Richard Burton,
Yeah.
I was looking at that and I realized what it was is Roddy McDowall was on the same film. They were both filming Cleopatra, I think in Egypt, somewhere else in North Africa anyway. And they had nothing to do for like weeks on end. So Richard Burton called up the director of this movie and told him he'd come and he'd do a couple of scenes for free just because he was bored. So him and Roddy McDowall flew over, filmed a couple of extra scenes that they just tossed into the movie and then went home. Just they did a couple of days of work for free on the movie. So that's why Richard Burton seems kind of thrown in there, He has good scenes. Funny.
So did they write those in for them, those scenes, or did they, or were those scenes already written and they put them in there?
It seemed like they just wrote them for him except that he does run it. Well, okay. So he runs into the West Side Story guy. I can't remember the actor's name. Richard Weimar.
Yeah.
Run into him, and that guy's story gets kind of tied up by that scene. Maybe originally, I bet what it was is his character probably shot the German with the boots on the wrong feet, because they lay this for the boots on the wrong feet early in the movie, and then they sort of didn't do anything with it, and then he shows up later. Right. I bet it was just going to be him with that guy, but I think they kind of worked. I think if Richard Burton wants to be in your movie in 1962,
right. So my biggest surprise is that Richard Todd guy. Okay. So Richard Todd plays the major who takes the bridge and has to hold until he relieves himself. Right.
Hold until relief. Yes.
So Richard Todd actually was there on that bridge.
Oh wow.
He wasn't one of the he wasn't one of the guys that came in on the glider. He was. Do you remember when Peter Lawford runs up with all the commandos, the paratrooper commandos, and they're the reinforcements? So he helped.
I don't know who any of these actors.
He's the one with the cool beret and the white turtranek. Like he's the only guy that had a uniform.
That's actually a really cool outfit. I was thinking I might want to get that. Actually,
So he's actually there. So Richard Todd was a lieutenant in those commandos. So he parachuted in and then relieved. That guy's John Howard, Major John Howard, is who Richard Todd plays. So Richard Todd relieves Major John Howard from the bridge. He was the relief, hold until relieved. He was the relief, and then they fought the Germans back and held the bridge until more reinforcements showed up. So I thought it was so cool that Richard Todd actually was there on that bridge, met Major Howard, who he then portrayed. And one of the cool little pieces of trivia was that so they're all wearing, berets. British are really big into berets for their special forces.
Okay.
So he's wearing a beret in the movie. That was actually his beret that he wore on D-Day. So that's his real beret. And the only change he made is he took the crest off of it, like the real crest that he had, and he put the crest of Major John Howard on it instead. Other than that, it was a real beret. So I was like, wow, that is so cool. It's like full circle, So you go in the army, do all this great stuff in World War II, you get out, you become an actor, and then you end up acting in the same thing that you did in the war. It's kind of neat.
That's nuts. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I like that.
I thought that was a cool part. So now it's all up to you, man. It's in your hands, capable hands of McArthur.
I mean, for the sake of drama, I'd like to play devil's advocate, I guess, and try to argue. It was a huge success. It's a huge fun war. It's a war movie that's still good to watch today. You know, I mean, it'd be anachronistic to complain about some of the little things like when people die, it's pretty bloodless, which is a little. You watch that today and you're like, did that guy just die? Why did that guy die? He just grabbed his chest and fell over.
Right, fell over. Sure.
You know, because like Steven Spielberg does not do that. Now that's
right
because he's trying very carefully. Today, you would never make him. See, I think this movie was criticized at the time for being pro-war, and I suppose, and in as much as it can be, yeah, I guess it probably would be. So I mean, you just wouldn't do that today. You wouldn't make a Hollywood big movie and make it completely rah-rah. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I mean, it's just the docudrama feel of it, getting everybody together and what they did with the locations and working in the actual information for the film. And I don't know, it's a pretty good movie. So, I mean, I would definitely drink to it. So.
All right, cool. So we're toasting it.
Yep. Cheers.
All right. Well, cheers. Well,
I feel like one of those guys. I feel like one of those guys that used to call baseball games in the 40s on the radio. They hit together. Whenever somebody was playing, you know.
It's a home run, clack. Yeah, that's all right. Exactly. Cool. Well, that was fun, man. That was a good time. So next we're going to do
Stop Making Sense.
Stop Making Sense. We're going to try to do that next week, I think, right?
Documentary. Yeah, I'm up for it. I'm all ready to go. I watched it and my notes and everything. So
very cool.
I think we'll be drinking. Did I say? Did we come up with anything?
You did.
Did?
Yeah. You came up with
yes.
You came up with bourbon.
Yes, bourbon. Right. Bourbon, because apparently David Byrne likes bourbon to some extent. So
well,
it's
yeah.
tough.
We'll talk about the bourbon that he likes too, and why we're not drinking that. So,
is it expensive?
Oh, I told you. I told you. Obscure, esoteric. You know, some weird thing.
Well, that's appropriate.
It's very appropriate. Like I said, he's the first of the hipsters. So
I would say he's a proto hipster. Yeah. So
yeah.
All right.
Very,
well,
very
I think we're done with The Longest Day. We will reconvene next week, and we'll send everybody out there in Toasting the Classics land the Talking Heads version.
That's right. Thank you, everybody.
For Toasting the Classics, I'm Dave McArthur.
I'm Clint Lanier.
And I guess we're gonna see you guys next time. Peace out.
Wrap it up. Bye.
That's it for episode 58 of Toasting the Classics. For those playing along at home, get some indie bourbon. The more eclectic and hard to find, the better, for our discussion of the 1984 Talking Heads concert film Stop Making Sense. If you'd like to get in touch, please send us an email at toastingtheclassics@gmail.com. Send us show ideas, comments, complaints, and let us know your favorite John Wayne movie. Check out my blog at theattractivenuisance.com and follow us on Twitter at @ractivenuisance. Our music was written by Michelle McArthur. See you next time on Toasting the Classics.